The Energy Talk.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubunmi Olajide and thank you so much for joining us again this week. Today, I have a very special announcement. After 2 years and 2 months and with over 70 episodes published, the Energy Talk will be finally announcing and probably announcing very soon our first official sponsor to help us grow and to get to the next stage of our development as a platform. This is something that I'm, of course, extremely proud about, and it's taken a tremendous amount of work to get to this stage. And in the next few weeks, we'll be announcing Student Energy as the sponsor of the Energy Talk podcast. I'll be working together until the end of the year and collaborating on a few episode pieces that I'm very excited to share as well. Today, we're going to be speaking with Janice Tran, who coincidentally happens to be one of the co-founders of Kanin Energy. And at the time we recorded this back in March, we both had no idea that Kanin Energy would become much closer to the podcast in terms of sponsorship. So this was just a good, honest conversation. But Janice was part of the founding members of Student Energy. And it's so amazing that the organization that she and her friends built while in university has turned into something that can create platforms and create opportunities for other people. In this episode, we're going to speak into Janice about her career path. From working with Generate Capital to starting our own company, Kanin Energy, to decarbonize heavy industries. Thank you to Jigger Shaw and to Meredith Adler, who made introductions and put in good word in order to make this episode happen. And I'm so excited to share this with you, so enjoy.
A quick background about myself. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of a company called Kanin Energy. So it's Kanin Energy. Check us out at kaninenergy.com. And what we focus on is industrial decarbonization. We're focused on waste heat to power to begin with. But the broader issue that we're talking about is industrial decarbonization. So heavy industry is responsible for about a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And, we need a lot more people focusing on all the ways to reduce those emissions. And that can go, from the large scale of like carbon capture, but there's also kind of more here and now technical solutions that can also be looked at and companies being formed around like industrial efficiency and things like that. So that's what we're focused on in Kanin Energy. And but prior to this, I was working at an investment firm called Generate Capital. So we do project finance, investing in all types of renewable energy and sustainability, climate tech projects. So it's not necessarily on the venture capital side, but I was looking at kind of investing in steel in the ground, things that were already proven technology-wise, but helping these companies and these technologies scale on a wide basis. So my portfolio was in anaerobic digestion, and I was a very early employee at the fund, and watched it grow, which is super exciting and very insightful, and has helped me learn how to grow my company as a result. But yeah, so in that process at Generate, we invested in we built the largest portfolio of anaerobic digesters in North America. So that was really interesting and fun to challenge the status quo and what was kind of believed to be the case for biogas investing previously. And we kind of questioned all the assumptions and catalyzed that sector. And then prior to that, on top of it all, is also one of the co-founders for Student Energy. And so that's why it's super exciting to be here, because it's been fun to see this kind of like my baby essentially grow to this flourishing nonprofit, globally inspiring other youth to do something that me and kind of like 2 other people really wanted to learn about, which was, how do we make energy more sustainably and taking a multidisciplinary approach to it. So sorry, that was a really long introduction, but my life has kind of brought me in a lot of different adventures and journeys. So happy to share any of that.
Yeah, and I actually want to hear more about how the idea for Kanin came up, because it's a very specialized problem that you are trying to solve, and obviously as well, being a female CEO of an energy company is also unfortunately quite rare. So how did the idea come about for Kanin, and what was the aha moment that you said that this was a challenge that you wanted to solve for the industry?
So I'd say that, my experience at Generate Capital and investing in and waste to value projects was insightful because there's these industries in the climate tech sustainability sector, like, electric vehicles or solar, wind, kind of carbon capture. These things are, they're sexy, they're cool, they're like new technologies and really kind of fascinating. But when you look at, where are emissions globally and what are causing them, there's a lot of these sources of emissions that are just not cool or sexy or fancy. There are things like, waste, cow poop, which is what I looked at a lot. And then, and the industrial sector. So I just saw that there was a lack of kind of focus on kind of these forgotten or hard to abate sectors. So that's really what drew me into starting kind of Kanin Energy as kind of like the next stage of my career. And actually through the Student Energy Network, one of my co-founders and another kind of one of the co-founders of Student Energy and one of the kind of the early members of Student Energy, they were working on a geothermal company, and they saw that geothermal, although a great resource, had a lot of issues with drilling and kind of the risk involved. And so they found and stumbled into this kind of niche called waste heat to power. And so when we all dug in, it looked like, that it wasn't a technology issue, it was more of a business model issue of why it wasn't widely adopted. So, they called me over and they said, hey, I think we found something, you'd be the right fit, because it's very kind of, the business model required is more on the finance side, and then didn't quite have that background. So that's how I got tapped to do this. And so I kind of hummed and hawed and said, okay, yeah, like I'm ready. I've got a really great thing going at Generate, but I think, the world is calling me to a different direction. I should probably take it. And plus, it's a great opportunity to work with some of my best friends. So that's how I came over. And so we've been working on this company for about a year. Just goes to show, though, I wouldn't have made this jump if I didn't have these really long, kind of deep relationships with my co-founders here. So the power of kind of connection and early connections formed through the Student Energy Network has really, is the reason why I'm here.
Yeah, that's actually really great to hear. And that's actually such a really amazing story. So after you identify the problem, I think this is something else. How did you go about building the product, and what was that development stage like? Because it's something to have the correct idea, but execution is also very important. So what were the stages that you went throughout developing the product and the company, and how difficult was it, or was it something that you knew exactly what you were doing in the beginning?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's a saying, it's 1% the idea and 99% the implementation. So it's, building a company is really hard. It's definitely, I thought, being an investor was hard because of just the combination of the technical and the soft skills. But wow, being an entrepreneur is really hard. It requires you to be, to stretch your social IQ, your mental IQ, your ability to see around corners a lot. So I think, the process of building a company is, I think, first of all, it's kind of cheesy to say, but it's all about the people. If you have the right people and hire the right people, things kind of work themselves out. And so it's not the silver bullet or the answer, but having a strong team, especially in the company that we're in, is really where the value lies. So we just have a fantastic team of really knowledgeable, engineers, markets people, policy people, experienced business development people, and each one person on our team just carries a ton of weight on their shoulders. So in no way is this my company, even though I'm so honored to be the CEO of this company, but I'm just helping with kind of strategic direction and being kind of the quarterback on the field. Everybody at our team does just so much work and brings their all to it. So I think that is probably the biggest thing about starting the company. And then the next is really, market timing. So it's reading the tea leaves of what are the problems that you're trying to solve. You don't create a large company without solving a very immediate need or problem for your customers. And so our approach at Kanin has been very methodical and data driven from day one. We have this concept that we always say, which is, first principles thinking. And so we look at something, we don't just assume that, something that we hear off a podcast or whatever is right. We want to get to the crux of why, to the crux of the data. So everything is very data driven. We have a lot of even for our startup, maybe it's overkill, but I don't think so. We track all of our numbers. We do regular check-ins to make sure that we're responding to the market and that we're pivoting when possible. And I think, it's the capital piece has been interesting as well, raising for a company that is a development company. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the VC world and then also in the project finance world. So I think the ability for me coming from the capital background has been helpful because I'm, able to navigate how to use capital correctly for a very capital intensive company. So that's been positive. And then the industrial efficiency place is just something that the world is starting to clue into. It's what's the next frontier of decarbonization? And industrial emissions is definitely one of that. So I think market timing and just our ability to face those challenges are what make us different.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting because I actually want to touch on something more that you mentioned towards the end, which was about finances. So you mentioned obviously that you have a very strong background in finance. So how was that process? Because I know that Kanin has raised from a seed round and you've raised some money after that. So what was that process like, and what is it like kind of preparing for the company to get to that stage, especially as you mentioned in a very capital intensive space that people aren't, not many investors are really used to working in that kind of energy space. I think it's fair to say. I think even from the context of Africa that I'm more familiar with, they're very specialized venture capital firms that are popping up and different kind of funds that are specifically built just to address energy projects. So what was it like, and what lessons did you really take away from the process?
Yeah, the capital markets right now for climate tech is it's a little bit crazy. It's something that we haven't really seen before. And there's a lot of money, there's a lot of VCs, a lot of new money popping in and investing in these new kind of climate tech companies. And there's this really great article about the need to invest in new tech and then the need to invest in developers and projects. So it's on my LinkedIn if anybody wants to take a look. It's by Lacuna Capital. So I think more broadly, there's actually a lot of capital there, which is not is unique to the clean tech world. In the oil and gas world right now, we're seeing investors flee away from that sector. And many of them are going to things like climate tech and renewable energy. So that's a great thing for our sector. The thing, though, that when we were fundraising at Kanin is we talked to a lot of investors, but we're finding that these investors who are traditionally coming from a software background or investing with a software lens, a traditional VC lens, they're going to be missing a lot of the opportunity for wealth creation in this new sector, in the climate tech sector, because when you think about software is essentially creating the world that we know, but in a digital way. And climate impact and carbon reductions, it's not digital. It is physical infrastructure. It's in the physical world. You have to, in order to decrease emissions, you have to look at physical infrastructure, reducing emissions from a plant, from a building, from your car, which is all tangible, steel, concrete things. When you make a mistake in the digital world, it takes you an hour or two, maybe a day to fix that bug, and away you go. So the margin for error is not as high. Whereas if you make a problem or an issue in the physical world, say you built a plant incorrectly or you sized something incorrectly, but that has ramifications worth millions of dollars, can take years even to uncover or to mitigate, and it could be completely gone. So that rate of change and risk is different. There's also just the scale of investment is different. But if the world is really serious about taking advantage of this $1 trillion opportunity that is the kind of reimagining of the physical infrastructure on energy, there's a lot of money to be made there. But by applying a very software VC focused lens, that's just not the right capital. And so, the process of us fundraising, and we were very fortunate that we hit the market when people were listening. There were a lot of people that were interested in what we were doing, and I had, because of my background in the investment world, was able to tap into these networks. But even with that, it was hard to finance or hard to get our initial seed round because this lack of understanding of where's the problem actually lie. Many of the investors that we talked to were focused on a software kind of lens because that's what they're used to investing in. That's what their LPs allowed them to invest. That was the structure of their fund. And the biggest takeaway that I took from that experience is that we need to educate. We need to come up with new ways to fund climate tech companies. We need to find new patient capital for that. There's just a lot of innovation that can be had if we're serious about creating new clean energy companies. Not just clean energy companies that are creating like R&D, new tech that takes 10 years to commercialize. If we're serious about also funding the developer community that takes that tech that works and scales them. So there's a lot of ways that the capital community can contribute to that growth. If we look at software, we need both entrepreneurs and we need the money to fund those entrepreneurs. That's how software was able to grow so quickly. We now need that support for entrepreneurs in the clean tech side if we're really serious about reaching our 2050 and 2030 targets.
I actually want to talk next about the applications for the technology that Kanin is developing. So I'll just list the industries because I found your website. So you can work with the cement, natural gas, iron, steel, and biomass facilities. And that just has a very wide range of applications because all those industries have heavy machinery that, of course, generate heat, and you could turn that into energy potentially. But what's really interesting about this, it's funny you mentioned the software sector, is kind of a merging of business models in a way. So there's hardware as a service model. So I really want you to talk about the business model that you're developing at Kanin and how that is going to play out in the future to work with all these different industries that you're tapping into.
Yeah, so we, I would say like more broadly, we're an industrial efficiency company, and in the waste heat to power sector, we're really looking for any type of industrial process that emits waste heat as a part of that process. So that's why you see like cement and steel and refineries, anything with like gas compression that typically has it. So although the industries that we touch are quite broad, the application and that process is pretty much the same. We're taking a waste heat stream, we're taking as much heat that we can from that, running it through an organic Rankine cycle turbine or other type of similar kind of heat conversion technologies, and creating other power or recycling the heat back into that process. It all goes down to there's a waste product that's at these sites and that has energy and that has value. So if they're, especially in a carbon constrained world where there is a price on carbon, we're kind of seeing that in Canada, and hopefully we'll see that, in the United States sometime soon. There's a business model to be made from this. So yeah, I think we're, a little bit ahead of the curve, but there's definitely a market there, and we're using kind of technology that's both available and new that we're integrating into our process.
And could you just talk more about that specifically? Because I read this interesting article that was talking about how you're able to potentially move the infrastructure between places and really share the same infrastructure without having any costs directly to the host of the manufacturing plant or the natural gas refinery or stuff like that. So how does that really play out? Because I think that is very, very interesting, and that's a very innovative approach to a problem.
Yeah, totally. That's our business model. So when we did the deep dive into, why aren't these technologies more widely used, we saw that it was because of a payback period problem or a mismatch of capital problem. And so these large industrial sites, their bread and butter, what their money is used for at the end of the day when they make profits, is to reinvest it back into the business. And so that cost of capital, that hurdle rate, is actually quite high for them to invest in things that aren't core, especially when we're talking about kind of $20 to $100 million projects. So these things are quite large. So traditionally these projects just haven't really hit that kind of high up in that list of investments, because they're investing maybe in health and safety and other things. And so what we're doing is we're bringing in patient capital. We're bringing in through kind of my networks and things like that to match patient capital with these types of projects. And the goal here is, by doing that, we'll pay for the project, or our investors will pay for the project. They'll get the returns, and then we'll also buy the waste heat, give these hosts a royalty payment, or in other words, buy their waste heat, and then create the project on their site. So they're in the eyes of the customer, they're able to get a free project. They don't have to put any kind of money down on it, and they're able to get money straight from day one by giving us their waste heat, and so they get a revenue payment right away. So what we're hoping that with this business model is that it'll allow many of those kind of plants that would be investing in this type of infrastructure, but couldn't because of the hurdle rates. They're now able to with our unique business model. But not all the projects want to take our capital either. So some want to just do it on their own, and that's okay too. So we can just do a design, construct, and operate model. So we do end-to-end development. So our customers don't have to worry about anything. We will just take care of all of it, including the financing, if desired. Just removing those barriers to adoption.
Well, that's actually really awesome to actually hear, and it's so great that innovation is still coming into the sector. And another piece is, has it been difficult running the company as a female CEO? Because the energy space obviously is largely men that have the leadership positions. On the podcast as well, we kind of see with the people we host, most of the times when we talk to CEOs, they almost always are men. So how has it been adjusting to the role, and has it been challenging in any way because of that, or is it something that you haven't really had to deal with yet, or you don't really want to deal with?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, because one of the reasons why I wanted to start a company was to reimagine how you can create a company with a diverse lens. So I think I was talking to someone about this the other day, is we are in this unique situation or unique moment in time where the infrastructure around us is being recreated, rethought, and rebuilt. And so not just the physical infrastructure, we also have the opportunity to rebuild the social infrastructure along with that industry. And so it's very difficult for, say, like an established oil and gas company to overcome that inertia of gender biases and inclusion and the way to implement that. But if you're building it from scratch and you build it into your DNA, theoretically it can be a lot simpler, and you don't have to overcome that like historical inertia to implement it. And so that's what we're hoping here. I mean, as a female CEO, I think kind of growing up through my career, I've been in this sustainability sector for over a decade, and it's predominantly male, especially when you're looking at finance or energy. It's predominantly male. But I've also met some really, many of my mentors, actually all of my mentors were male. I didn't have a single female mentor. So I don't quite know what it is like to, follow a strong female leader. But that's okay. I mean, that's part of trailblazing. That's part of what you're doing, what everyone kind of in the sector is doing. We're trailblazing. And so you just own it. And so it's so I haven't experienced what that strong female leadership is. So I'm going to just go figure it out and redefine that. So that's been interesting. And when I say redefine, I think about when you dig down into first principles thinking, what holds back kind of ambitious women from being in leadership positions or from being in the workplace. And it's not just like a female, you're female, you're a woman, therefore you have a glass ceiling. It's actually, it's a ceiling for women that work. And it's actually a ceiling for anyone that really kind of has kids. That ceiling is for those that have kids and work. So if you're able to do things like get to the root of the problem, look at like interesting ways to provide childcare, interesting ways to provide flexibility at your work so that you can allow for both of those two worlds to combine, not just for women, also for men. Like two of my co-founders are men that just had newborn children in the formation of our company, in the early days of our company. And so we've had to deal with, what does it mean to have a very demanding role, but also to be a good father and, hopefully with me, like, a good mother. But building that into our DNA. So we have some like cool ideas that we've been like thinking through, combing through like the articles and what journals are saying and the research is saying to, again, build and redefine like what a startup can be to encourage, to be that model for good workplace diversity and inclusion. So TBD, we're still early, in our life, but, fingers crossed that can be adapted.
Yeah, and it's actually really great because you've had so many unique experiences. And just to give like a bit of like a context here, so in on the African continent, this is something that is beginning to become a lot more popular. You'll have lots more entrepreneurs trying to come into the clean energy space, and the environment for funding projects like that is becoming a lot more accessible. And there are lots of different systems that are coming up to support that. And I think you have a very unique perspective because coming from the finance side, actually looking at projects like which ones could do the best with a certain amount of capital, and also starting your own company from scratch and really building that out and looking at the ways to make the business model more resilient to the current landscape that we have. What advice would you give clean energy entrepreneurs from anywhere when they're looking at how they can identify problems in the space, how they can begin building projects, and how they can make their pitch attractive to actually get the kind of finance they need to build the ideas they have? So what advice do you have? And I'd really love to hear it.
Yeah, so I would say that if you're looking to contribute, make an impact, and you're kind of earlier, you have some experience, or maybe that's, or if you don't, that's fine too. But if you're really looking to do something in the space, like I would really strongly encourage you to start your own company. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful right off the bat because, a lot of companies are not. The statistics for building a successful company are not in your favor, but you learn a lot and at least you tried. And I think that when we think about our 2030 and 2050 targets, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that unlike in other sectors where the historical precedents and like historical kind of learnings are really relevant. Here, it's not so much. Like things are being reimagined, rebuilt, policies are changing all the time. So let's say you had, 20, 30 years of experience, that doesn't lend as much weight or credibility, like maybe some credibility, but it doesn't, lend as much weight as in other industries because things are just so new. So I would say that, if you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, just take that leap. Do it in a smart way. There's lots of kind of books and people, get some really great advisors. Like I said at the beginning, having the right team, having a very strong team is going to help you get there. But there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. And so we need those entrepreneurs, like the ecosystem. If you look at tech or you look at like, any kind of startup environment, the startup industry, like the ecosystem is predicated on strong entrepreneurs, strong ideas. These are the doers of the society. They are the ones that create the economic impact that are able to create that change. Is that they go and they start things. So yeah, go do it. Go do it. If you want to see something done, go do it yourself. It's not as scary as as you think. I mean, like, Olu, you did it. You had this idea, and I'm sure it was very, very scary at first. It's definitely scary for me, like, starting Kanin. But at the end of the day, like, if no one else is going to do it, then it's kind of your responsibility to go ahead. Yeah, Olu, like, yeah, maybe just shed some light on that when you first started your podcast.
Yeah. Do you want me to share about how I started the podcast?
Yeah. Talk about that experience of starting something new. Like, it's not something it's scary, but it's probably very rewarding. At least it has been for me.
Yeah. I guess. So since you work at Generate, you're very familiar with Jigger. So I listened a lot to the Energy Gang podcast, and I really loved the way they talked about energy, because I was very passionate about the space, and there just wasn't really a lot of people I could talk about close to me. So I was in the oil and gas space, so I felt very, very locked in. And I tried searching for podcasts that really covered the issue from an African perspective, and I just couldn't find any. And I know that the folks at the Energy Gang mean well, but when they talked about energy access and when they talked about the African continent, or when they talked about SDG 7, it felt very disconnected. And I understand, because they've never actually lived in Nigeria like I have, and they didn't grow up there. And I felt like that voice was really missing. So that was really when I decided that, you know what, I could start this. And it was very scary, because I didn't know anything about podcasting, and it was a huge leap at the time. But it was rewarded, because even though I didn't know anything, I found a lot of people who were willing to support me, people willing to come on, and I had people who I never expected I'd be able to reach on the podcast, and it's really accelerated my learning. And actually, to your credit, something I have to say is that once you start something, you learn so much faster because you have to. So it's a very good accelerator in so many ways, and it has been fantastic for me personally. Yeah. So yeah, I actually completely agree with that, and thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure that this is going to help a lot of people who listen to this, and it's so great having that entrepreneurial energy on the podcast, and I think it's something that I want to have a lot more.
Well, I think, when you look around you, everything that you see, from this computer, this chair, like the way the rows are lined and created, and the creation of cement, like that's all created by people. And everything that you see, someone thought of, or a team of people thought of. And if it wasn't for, that person or those set of people, then we wouldn't have what we have today, right? So everything was created by people. And so when we think about, what it takes to get to our 2030 and 2050 targets, it's that same type of like creativity and that like entrepreneurial, industrious kind of thinking that's going to get us there, because we now need to very quickly reimagine how we're going to, rebuild our entire society. And what great opportunity for your career to do that, So, highly encourage it.
All right, Janice, thank you so much for making time for this and for sharing and being so honest about your journey with Kanin and your career. Thank you for being on the podcast, and it's been really a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And for all that are listening, definitely welcome you all to contact me. I'm super happy to chat with those that are aspiring kind of climate tech entrepreneurs, or just want to get into the space and make an impact. So thanks again for having me, and for those listening. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Energy Talk podcast. You can find us on all podcast listening platforms. Just search for the Energy Talk. Send us an email to @energytalkpodcast@gmail.com.